Welcome to the Maintenance Mavericks Podcast, where we talk about trends in maintenance, reliability, and asset operations. I'm your host, Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of UpKeep. For today's guest, I'm super excited to welcome Jonathan David here on the show. Jonathan has over 17 years as an active maintenance management professional in so many different industries, whether it's manufacturing, oil, gas, energy. Jonathan also serves as the founder of the Maintenance Institute Africa, which is an organization promoting industry best practices across the entire African continent. On top of building his own company, Jonathan is also the maintenance supervisor at Shell, as well as the principal consultant at Epsilon Reliability Solutions. When Jonathan is not working, he also enjoys watching a good movie and listening to music. So welcome to the podcast, Jonathan. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Ryan. I'm doing fantastic. I think that's quite an introduction. But hey, I'm a simple guy.
I mean, honestly, it sounds like you're anything but simple. You've got so much going on. Been working in the industry for over 17 years, running your own company. Like, man, you do a lot, Jonathan. How do you find the time to do all of that?
I have lots of energy, and I like to express myself in different ways. So if you give me too much routine, it gets boring for me. So I try to find ways to keep myself excited and keep myself focused. And sometimes doing these things just keep me going. So I try to balance it as much as I can. Nature of work I do also allows me some bit of time because, hey, you do some work on and you have certain amount of time off. So when I'm not actively doing company work, I have a good chunk of time off duty. So instead of just playing video games or watching TV, I use that to do other things.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a great segue into, kind of the introduction to you, Jonathan. So, the way that we generally kick off the shows, have you share a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how you were first introduced to this, field of maintenance and reliability? What's your journey been like?
I'll tell you a story, right? 2004, late 2004, early 2005, I had to go on an internship program based on my program at school at the time. So I needed to be on internship for about 3 months. I got a placement in a chrome rubber factory, and I was just to join the electrical maintenance team at the time to do their daily work. So I had duties assigned to me for 3 months. But that was my first introduction. And it's an experience I appreciate today because I basically walked into a company that was 100% reactive. So when you talk maintenance and reliability, there was nothing around PMs, there was nothing around condition monitoring. They had nothing. So we came to work in the morning, we sat in the electrical office and waited for things to get bad. And then when they get bad, we go fix it, and then we'll come back and have a seat. So that was my first introduction. And if not for my experience today, that's what I would think maintenance and reliability looked like. Mm-hmm. But that was my first introduction for those 3 months as an intern. But much, much later, as I grew, as I went into the oil and gas, I saw differently. So what it gives me is I'm able to distinguish between both worlds. I know what maintenance and reliability should not be, and I know what it should be. So that was my introduction.
That's awesome. And obviously 17 years later, you're still, obviously in the industry working as a maintenance supervisor over at Shell. I'd be curious, how did you make your way over into Shell?
Sometimes we'll say it's a stroke of fate. When I graduated, I joined a renewable energy company. I started off as a technician there, and then I rose up and I became the technical manager there at the time. So while doing that work, my colleagues saw an advert for a Shell training, and they brought you to the office. So what I did was we all applied for the opportunity just to get trained. I didn't know a lot then about the details and the intricacies about oil and gas, but we all applied, sat for the tests, and then when the opportunity came, I was chosen to be one of those that gets trained. Now, at the end of the training, you get an opportunity to be interviewed for a job. So at the end of the training, I got interviewed, and I did well at the interviews. But again, we had to be like on a waiting list. So I was on a waiting list for about 2 years. So obviously after training, I went back to work. And then by the time they returned back to me at about 2 years, I had the opportunity for two giants, right? I had Total and I had Shell at the same time. So I made the choice to join Shell. That was in 2009. And yeah, I think it's been a fantastic choice so far. No, nothing lost on Total though, but Total was giving me a non-technical role in operations, and I wanted something much more technical for myself. So I decided to go the route of Shell.
That's amazing. And it sounds like it all kind of got kickstarted off with like seeing an advertisement and, using it as an opportunity, and kind of just one thing led to another. And
Yeah.
13 years later, still over at Shell, just continuing to grow your own career. And I'm sure really apply the world's industry's best practices over at Shell for maintenance and reliability. So it must be a really, really cool opportunity to see what's going on over there.
So it's fantastic to work in Shell because it's one of the best out there. And I think there's so much that companies like this do that's not immediately obvious to the outside world. We just keep it within ourselves.
Yeah. Well, today is the day to share some of the knowledge that you can with our listeners about, what makes maintenance reliability so great at Shell. I mean, the other week we had another guest on, and we're actually talking about the maintenance reliability industry and industry best practices. There are a few industries that kind of like do reliability to the absolute best. And we kind of named like aerospace is one of those industries. Oil gas is another one of those industries where failure is not an option in these two industries. Versus, it sounds like you've also seen the opposite side where it almost seems like failures and breakdowns are the norm.
No, so if you look at the oil and gas, industry, really, I think it's if you take out aerospace and coal, it's one of the most advanced when it comes to talking about reliability. Obviously, because of the consequences, but it still goes back to those basic principles that drive us as humans, right? They say as humans, we're either running away from pain or we're running toward pleasure. So naturally, when it comes to the risk involved in some of these industries, hey, that's pain. Lives are at stake. So you just have to do what you have to do to make sure that you cross over. And besides, oil and gas is a pretty, pretty profitable business. So it can also afford it. There are many other companies out there, maybe in manufacturing and coal, that the margins are not so fantastic. So even if they wanted to do more in terms of maintenance and reliability, even if they wanted to apply some of the best practices out there, it might not be economically viable for them to do that. But oil and gas is pretty profitable. And obviously, if you know what the news says now about the price of oil, it means it makes good sense that companies like these would be able to invest in maintenance and reliability, and also in safety as well, to make sure that they get the returns that they deserve.
It's a really good question, actually. So right now, I think we're all very aware gas prices going through the roof right now. It's an all-time high. And then you kind of also look back at, I mean, even 2 years ago when, the cost of oil is just plummeting too because of, the recent news of COVID. We are in this like surge of oil prices right now. And obviously, like the price of oil surges up and down. And you're mentioning when companies are highly profitable with catastrophic failures, they tend to invest more in maintenance and reliability. How does the change in oil prices and profitability of a business, how have you seen that affect the maintenance and reliability department? Do you ever see like when profitability is tight, there's pullback on maintenance reliability spending, or has it always been just central to oil and gas?
I wouldn't say it's just about being central. So two things that, one of the key things that has been central to oil and gas for a while has been safety. Reliability has also been there, but maybe not central. But if you given the periods we've had recession in the last decade, and then you now bring COVID into the picture, you know that the dynamics are changing. And there's something about the industries in general. Oil and gas leads, a lot of others follow. So sometimes what you see in other companies are driven by the messages coming from oil and gas, because hey, once energy prices go through the roof, it impacts other companies, right? If energy prices go down, it impacts other companies. So what that does to oil and gas is just the way any other company would say, hey, prices are low, it's not profitable, we need to cut back. The same way oil and gas would do the same. And I remember almost like you said it about 2 years ago when prices practically disappeared and it was no longer profitable. Just imagine you run a business. Once there are no profits in the business, you have to tighten the belt, right? Sometimes you might have to lay off staff, because first of all, survival of the business is key. Yeah. The business has to survive in order to make profits. So naturally, just like any other business out there would say, hey, prices are low, and for how long can prices be low, right? If we foresee that it's going to be low for a longer period, then we need to take measures to cut down on our costs. So you find out that the projects would first of all be stalled, and lots of other things would go off until, but naturally maintenance, capital spending in maintenance would definitely take a hit. The way you see it in economics, exactly the same way happen. First of all, it's a business before we talk maintenance and reliability, and all businesses look to be profitable.
I remember reading in the news about 2 years ago, like they were literally giving away barrels of oil for free to have someone else store it. Could you talk a little bit more about what was happening in that point of time, and how, what has shifted over the last, I guess, 2 years to completely flip it around in such a relatively short period of time?
If I go back to basic economics, right, demand is what drives prices. And so naturally, if you have oil and gas companies that kept on producing, even if they cut back production, most of them did not shut down. And with very, very limited mobility, most top consumers did not need that oil anymore. I remember a friend of mine that works aboard an LNG vessel that takes LNG to different countries and sell off. I remember they spent quite a bit of time at sea just looking for who would buy off their gas. If you have it and you keep producing, there are some facilities that you don't want to even shut down, because if you shut them down, the cost of bringing them back up is enormous, so you don't want to shut them down. So maybe you keep producing at a minimal level, but you need someone to take it off you. The levels to which prices went down about 2 years ago was such that we're practically hemorrhaging costs, because it's no longer about profitability. The question was, were we even making out the cost of producing each barrel of oil? So if you're not even making the cost and you have to keep producing, then you have to look for someone to take it off you, even if it's for peanuts, so that you can preserve your asset. Because one thing is sure, we knew that, or everyone knows, if you're in the industry, you know that the prices will not stay the same. Because the moment mobility returns, prices would definitely go back up. So you need to survive at that time to get the opportunity to make profits in the future. So at that time, it was much more about surviving, really, for most companies.
Yeah, I mean, look at where we are right now. I mean, it's so interesting. And it sounds like the business, if you're in the industry, you obviously knew that prices would return. It was just a period of time. But really it is this like shutdown cost that sounds like it's very enormous. Like what contributes to that shutdown cost? Like why is shutting it down and then restarting it back up so expensive?
So shutdown cost really comes down to the kind of facilities you run. Okay, there are basic facilities where the pressures in the wells still very good. You don't need gas lift, you don't need water injection to bring oil out. Depends on the technology used. So when you have natural flow, really you don't accumulate much in terms of shutdown costs. But you know that for some of this facility, they need water injection, they need gas injection to be able to continue producing, especially if you go to facilities. There are some facilities offshore, by nature of where they are, they needed to keep producing. So for example, if you had a floating production storage facility that's offshore, you can just turn off the power and turn off everything and leave the ship at sea. No, you have to keep producing to keep it going and maintain the facilities on there so that corrosion and all kinds of stuff don't set in. So if you're offshore, for example, the cost of returning to site is way bigger for you. But if you run, let's say, natural flow facility that's on land, then your cost of returning back to production might be much lower for you. So depending on the technology you're utilizing to bring in flow, that's really going to determine how much you spend. So, but it's not a fixed cost across board. So for some organizations, they can afford to shut down their facilities and be back up anytime they want. For some, it's not really feasible for them to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it must be. Yeah, you're totally right. It kind of depends on the facility, depends on the operations, depends on what kind of staff and where it is geographically, whether it's on land or out in sea. That definitely was very surprising to me when I heard that 2 years ago. It was like, wow, they're literally selling barrels of oil at for free, basically nothing.
For nothing. You have to keep going. You have to keep going. That's just the bottom line. You just have to keep going. And if you know you can't sustain it for long, then maybe you get to make the hard decision to shut down. So the decision to shut down is your last resort. Kind of as soon as prices started crashing, most of those organizations will practically maybe set up a situation room and say, hey, if it goes to this level, this is what we'll do. At this price, this is what we'll do. And if it gets to this level, then we might have no option than to shut down. So at the end of the day, they start implementing those things they've set out to do as mitigation step by step and say, hey, okay, if we give up our oil for free for 2-3 months, what would the impact be? And can we recover? So for some organizations, they just decided, okay, we obviously know there's no more profit for us this year. So we have to start dipping our hands in those reserves to get going. I mean, some organizations choose to make those kind of calls. But again, like I said, it's the economics of it at the end of the day.
Yeah. Super interesting. Jonathan, maybe going back to like maintenance reliability, like, you were kind of talking about your first job, your first internship, seeing, it sounds like every single job was a reactive breakdown. And now moving over into Shell, some of the leading industry's best practices around reliability. What are your thoughts around like the breakdown versus reliability centered maintenance? Like, do you believe that like there are unexpected failures that will just always occur? Do you kind of subscribe to this method that there's no such thing as like unexpected breakdown? It's more about how much fidelity and how much data we have to predict these things.
Typically, I think what I subscribe to is every breakdown kind of communicates with you before it happens. Unexpected breakdown, I wouldn't call it unexpected. The science would be there. If you don't take action on the science, then eventually you will have breakdown happen. Except we're talking about maybe a catastrophic event, an earthquake, a tsunami or something, or an external impact, right? So I think a good chunk of failures that happen would give you that clear-cut sign that something is about to happen. And if you have, like you said, if you have the right data, you have the right information, you would be able to take the right action. The difference between that experience for me and some of the things I've experienced today is, I think it's just a knowledge gap. So if I look back and look at who were the people in charge of maintenance there, what was their knowledge level, what did they understand? I think what we practically had was artisans in charge of maintenance, right? We had just artisans in charge of maintenance, and they were the ones managing maintenance almost end to end, apart from the maintenance manager was there, but I don't think he even had sufficient training when it comes to how to run a maintenance department. So what we simply did was break down and repair, break down and replace. I'll give you an example. We got to the point where we had motors, and our motors were getting burnt frequently. What we did, instead of doing a root cause analysis, I doubt we knew what it was. We simply hired someone that repaired motors, that would rewire the coils for us. And he was in our workshop. So if the motor goes bad, the coils get burnt, what do? We give it to the guy in the workshop. He records it for us, really. And I still remember, I make this example when I teach, and I say, during my time there was zero alignment. For example, we didn't do alignment, no balancing, nothing. Like, we didn't even use something as simple as a straight edge to align motors. Like, clearly we could see soft foot on our motors, and you just bolted it down same way. So if I look back, it's like that knowledge gap means we kept leaving money on the table and wasting efforts. And practically, if you go to that organization, there were very, very clear cases of safety incidents, which you knew was because we were not doing the right thing at the time. So I think that knowledge makes a difference. If I bring it back to your point, to what you said about unexpected breakdown just happen, it also depends on knowledge. If you have the right knowledge, you know what to look out for, you know how to interpret the data, then you will be able to make an informed decision. Or you could as well decide that I'll wait till it breaks down. So it's still an informed decision, but you know it's going to break down at some point.
Yeah. I mean, the way that I kind of categorize your thinking, Jonathan, and I actually very much believe this too. There's no such thing as an unexpected breakdown. It's more about what kind of data do we actually have? And then almost like making a decision on cost. Do we want to invest the amount of money to get the amount of data that we need to predict failures? And sometimes that's a yes, and actually sometimes that's a no. And that goes back to the conscious decision to say, I'm okay with unexpected breakdowns on this particular asset in this situation.
Absolutely.
So really appreciate all the knowledge, Jonathan. The way that we always end this show is ask a quick fire set of questions to leave our audience with a few extra golden nuggets of information. So you ready to jump in? I'll ask a question and hear your response in 20 seconds or less.
Okay, fantastic. Let's go.
All right. What's the best advice a mentor has ever given to you?
Best advice was chase knowledge. Never stop learning. And I think that's what I keep doing.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. 100% subscribe to that too. What about the most significant turning point in your career?
Most significant for me was, I think, starting up my business. And that came at some point where I felt, okay, I was in a company, I was utilizing my skills, but I thought I could do more. So having connected with international community of maintenance and reliability professionals, I saw an opportunity to do more, not just for myself, but I think for the community around me, because I saw a huge gap there. So jumping in that pond to take that decision to start something and to serve a community was a major turning point for me.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Never stop chasing knowledge, and also, taking the leap, and sometimes just saying, I'm going to go for it. What do you think the biggest misperception is about the oil and gas industry?
I think the biggest misconception is people think oil and gas is all bad, but especially when we start talking about renewables and climate change. But I think oil and gas funded a good chunk of the innovations we enjoy today. Oil and gas is actually funding renewables. So renewables might be the next thing, but hey, we need to fund it somehow. So I think oil and gas brought about major innovations, and it's not all dirty. And really, oil and gas still powers energy today, and it's still going to power the future.
I 100% agree with that, Jonathan. I totally agree that there's this conception that all oil gas is bad, but obviously it is literally what powers how we operate our day-to-day lives. All of the innovation that has gone into oil gas, we would be nowhere close. Society as a whole would be nowhere close to where we are today. And then ultimately, where we're going in the future too. So really appreciate that. What kind of resources do you learn from to stay up to date, Jonathan?
I think I'm a very visual learner. I actually like to sit in rooms to learn. I love LinkedIn a lot because I think LinkedIn is just a melting point of ideas if you know what to look out for. So one of the key ways I learn is I like to sit at events and get all the different kinds of knowledge come in. I attend conferences frequently. And then when I get all that information, I pick out what matters to me, what excites me, and then I go for it. So I use social media as a way to sense what's happening because there's so much information there. Aside from that, if I'm looking for specific knowledge, obviously, I know where to go for it, right? I know the sources to look out for. I know the partners. I know the people that are much more innovative in the industry, and I know how to look out for them. And hey, I think I know that UpKeep does a lot around these as well. I think I downloaded your app some time ago. I used it to teach a couple of guys about CMMS because I think you have a very simplified system that works instead of the giant the giant softwares we buy and that are too complicated to use.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate that. Is there a biggest takeaway that you hope all of our listeners will learn from today's discussion?
For me, the biggest, what I think anybody should take away is I started not really even knowing what maintenance is. And today I can be spontaneous to talk about it. And I think there's still so much for me to learn. I keep learning. Biggest takeaway is same thing my mentor told me, never stop learning, chase knowledge, find out what excites you. Sometimes what excites you might not what you thought would excite you, right? I'm enjoying business books. Funny enough, I'm enjoying reading business books and attending business courses today. Maybe because I'm an entrepreneur, but it's something I enjoy doing a lot these days. So keep chasing knowledge. I think at the end of the day, it all contributes to who we eventually become and how we impact our communities.
Never stop chasing knowledge. Absolutely love that. Can you share with all of our listeners all the different ways that they can connect with you and follow you on your journey?
Yes. So to connect with me, obviously, if you just go, LinkedIn is a big place I operate. So if you go on LinkedIn, Jonathan David is my name, or just type the LinkedIn URL, linkedin.com/Jonathan David 1. That will take you directly to my page. If you would like to email me, just my first name, Jonathan @tmiafrica.org. Jonathan@tmiafrica.org. So for those that understand, Tango Mike India Africa.org.
Awesome.
So those are the easiest ways to reach me.
Thank you again, Jonathan, and thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in today's episode of the Maintenance Mavericks Podcast. I'm Ryan. I'm your host. I'm also the CEO of UpKeep. You can also connect with me. I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. I hope you really enjoyed today's episode, and I look forward to connecting with all of you soon. Until next time, thanks again, Jonathan. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate having me on the podcast today.